Welcome, my dear. They laughed first, didn't they? Oh, how sweet it was, watching them tighten their circles, whisper behind their trembling fingers, throwing that precious little word at you, crazy. As if the word alone could cage you, clip your wings, erase the storms that brood inside your veins. They thought calling you names would dilute your venom, would sedate the wildfire in your chest. But oh, little did they know. Every word they spat was a matchstick, and every glance a bottle of gasoline. You weren't breaking down. No, you were breaking free. They saw tremors where there was thunder preparing its voice. They mistook your silence for defeat, your grin for madness, your philosophy for noise, because their feeble minds could not hold the weight of your truth without splintering into 1,000 fragile pieces. They wanted a world of straight lines and easy answers, little pre-packaged boxes with little pre-programmed minds, nodding politely and agreeing to the absurd rules written by invisible hands. And then you arrived, not to play their rigged game, but to flip the whole damn table and light it on fire. You didn't follow the script. You tore it up, swallowed the ashes, and wrote your own in a language too raw, too real, too horrifying for their delicate little realities. They said you were broken, and maybe you were, but broken like a dam before the flood, broken like a shell before the scream, broken like the earth before it swallows cities whole. They gawked at you like you were some museum piece of disaster, some cautionary tale to scare their children with. Don't end up like that, they'd mutter under their breath, clutching their pearls, sipping their poison, polishing their masks. They needed you to be wrong, you see, because if you were right, it meant their whole perfect little dollhouse was a lie. If you were sane, it meant they were trapped. So they voted, they pointed, they decided. Crazy, label you, shelve you, forget you. It was easier than confronting the reflection you held up to their faces, the one that showed the cracks running deep under their designer smiles. But time, time has a way of peeling paint off even the prettiest facades. When their castles started crumbling, when their prayers sounded like screams muffled under satin sheets, when their dreams rotted into insomnia and their love songs curdled into threats, something strange started happening. Those very same mouths that once sneered began to quiver with curiosity. Their wide-eyed children, all grown up and hollowed out, started whispering the things you once roared. Their therapists, their saviors, their confessors, their overpriced confessors, began weaving your madness into mantras, stitching your ravings into remedies, carving your chaos into commandments. Oh yes, they began to quote you, first in secret, and then in public, first in shame, and then in reverence. What they once called delusions, they now framed in gold and called wisdom. What they once named dangerous, they now teach in weekend workshops for the disillusioned. They took your howls, dressed them up in silk, and charged admission to hear echoes of your agony. They tried to sanitize your rebellion, bottle it, brand it, sell it back to the very hollow men who once mocked you. And yet, no matter how many buzzwords they wrapped around your legacy, no matter how many seminars they built atop your bones, they could never sterilize the truth you bled. They could only hope to sip from it, carefully, afraid it might still burn their tongues. You see, they never understood that you weren't trying to destroy the world out of bitterness. You weren't trying to hurt them for sport. You were simply allergic to their illusions. Where they built prisons of politeness, you broke them down with bare hands. Where they draped their wounds in velvet, you tore the bandages off and let the rot spill under the sun. Where they cowered in the safety of crowds, you stood alone, naked and screaming at the void. Not because you were mad, but because you were awake. And in a world drunk on denial, consciousness is the most unforgivable sin. Their therapists started quoting you because deep down they realized what you had wasn't madness. It was clarity sharpened into a knife. It was grief cooked into gunpowder. It was love twisted by betrayal into a blade they couldn't pull from their own throats. You spoke the language of collapse, of endings that must happen before anything real can ever begin. You weren't a mistake. You were a necessity. A storm sent to drown the parasites clinging to the crumbling hull of a sinking ship. They called you crazy because they didn't want to hear what you had to say. They didn't want to know that their castles were built on the bones of better men, that their smiles were stitched from the flesh of the forgotten, that their rules were written in invisible ink, visible only when the blood starts to flow. And yet, here they are, burning sage, quoting your chaos, writing books about embracing the darkness, holding ceremonies to summon the very demon they once tried to drown. How beautifully ironic, isn't it? They needed a monster to teach them how to be human again. They needed a madman to tell them they were asleep. They needed you to remind them of everything they tried so hard to forget. Their healers, their wise men, their gurus, all scavengers now, picking through the ruins of your heart for something shiny enough to sell to the next lost soul wandering through the maze of mirrors. But no matter how many phrases they steal, no matter how many doctrines they forge from your ashes, they'll never capture the fire that birthed you. They'll never cage the beast they once spat upon. Because you weren't a trend. You weren't a theory to be quoted or a method to be taught. You were a reckoning, a consequence long overdue, a reminder that beneath every well-manicured garden, there's a graveyard hungry for bones. They laughed when you howled, but now they whisper your name like a prayer. They're too scared to finish. And while they package your pain and sell it to the highest bidder, they can still feel it, that quiet, gnawing terror, that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the crazy one after all. Maybe you were the only one who ever saw the house burning while they danced in the flames. They can quote you all they like. They can print your words in gilded books, sing your songs in hollow churches, tattoo your warnings across their flesh. But it won't save them. It won't spare them from the fire you smelled first, from the rot you tasted long before the feast was served. Their therapists can wrap your truths in pretty words, whisper them in velvet rooms, but the echo will always belong to you, raw, bloody, and laughing beneath the skin of their new doctrines. Because the world you tried to warn them about, it's here now. And no polished quote, no soothing mantra, no desperate prayer will save them from the storm you saw coming. The floodgates are open. The sky is cracking. The walls are bleeding. And through it all, one voice, your voice, hums like a blade against their ribs, reminding them that the reckoning isn't coming. It's already here, and it's only just begun. You can feel it in the way the air trembles, thick with the scent of old lies burning in new fires. You can see it in the cracks, spiderwebbing across the faces of the ones who built their empires on your broken bones. They clutch their rituals tighter now, chanting stolen words, decorating their cages with the poetry of a mind they once spat upon. But no amount of borrowed magic can summon back the gods they abandoned. No scripture can unwrite the sins they've tattooed into the very architecture of their souls. The collapse isn't a threat anymore. It's the law now, written in the marrow of everything they touch. And you're not the villain of this story. You're the consequence, the aftertaste of every deal made in blood, the echo of every truth they smothered under velvet and silk. They tried to drown you in diagnoses, strangle you with smiles, bury you under consensus. But when they returned to dance upon your grave, they found nothing but a mirror, and in it, their own faces twisted into parodies of the sanity they once worshipped. Their therapists, their philosophers, their architects of recovery. They're all just scavengers now, picking through the carcass of a world that was already dead the day it declared you diseased. You warned them, not with polite little leaflets and carefully worded speeches, no, but with the kind of raw animal honesty that rips the skin off illusions. You spoke in the language of ruptures, of revolutions, that start inside a ribcage before they spill into the streets. They called you unstable, because stability in a crumbling world is just another kind of suicide. They called you violent, because violence is the only language a dying empire understands. They called you mad, because madness is the name they give to freedom when it refuses to wear a leash. And now, these trembling little architects of broken dreams quote you like scripture, but only the parts that sound safe, only the fragments they can neuter and declaw, stitch onto bumper stickers and coffee mugs. They mouth your words, but choke on your meaning. They teach your philosophies in workshops with early bird discounts, promising salvation for the price of admission. But they can't package the storm that forged you. They can't replicate the furnace that melted your bones into the weapon you became. They sell watered-down versions of your gospel to the same crowds that once threw stones at you in the streets. They want your fire without your ashes. They want your rebellion without your scars. They want your wisdom, but not your war. But you are not a story they get to edit. You are not a legacy they get to curate. You are the howl that punctures polite society's endless empty prayers. You are the crack in their polished glass, spidering outwards, laughing silently as the pressure mounts. You are the consequence breathing down their necks every time they dare to look at themselves too closely in the mirror. Their therapists scribble down your truths in sterile little notebooks, nodding sagely as their patients sob confessions you could have predicted years ago. They charge by the hour to help the lost. Remember the things you screamed for free. They diagnose the symptoms of a world you autopsied with bare hands. And still, they pretend not to know where the plague began. Still, they tiptoe around the simple, brutal fact that you laid bare. The sickness was never inside you. It was inside them all along. You were never the infection. You were the fever breaking. You were the inevitable backlash of a soul that refused to be domesticated. You were the red flare shooting into a night sky painted with counterfeit stars. And now, as the ground crumbles under their polished shoes, as the walls bleed truths they can no longer ignore, they scramble to make sense of the madness by quoting the very prophet they tried to crucify. But there's a price to borrowing words forged in blood. There's a curse stitched into the syllables of every truth they once dismissed. They thought they could steal your fire and not get burned. They thought they could wear your rage like a costume without tasting the venom it drips. They thought they could siphon your strength without shouldering the grief that birthed it. How adorably naive, how perfectly doomed. Because every time they repeat your words, every time they bow their heads to the gospel of your chaos, they invite a little more of you into their brittle, trembling worlds. And you are not a God who forgives. You are not a story that ends neatly. You are not a warning to be heeded. You are a curse that clings to the tongue, a virus encoded into every stolen scripture, a reckoning growing roots inside their borrowed sanctuaries. You didn't just survive. You became contagion. You became the question mark that infects every sermon, every lecture, every hollow little pep talk they use to keep the panic at bay. You became the whisper in the therapist's ear, asking, what if sanity is just the slowest form of surrender? You became the itch under their skin, the one they can't scrub away no matter how many affirmations they chant in the mirror. Their world is falling, and they are quoting you between sobs. Their kingdoms are burning, and they are chanting your truths to each other like spells to keep the wolves at bay. But you were the wolf. You were always the wolf. And now there's blood on the snow, and no prayers will save them from the feast they tried to deny. They called you crazy. They needed you to be crazy. Because if you were right all along, then everything they believed, everything they built, everything they sacrificed their souls to protect, it was all just smoke swirling above a graveyard. If you were right, then their sanity is the real madness. Their civilization is the real chaos. Their morality is the real disease. And that's the truth they can't unlearn, no matter how many yoga retreats they attend, no matter how many therapists they pay to pat their trembling hands. You infected them. You infected the idea that maybe, just maybe, the world they thought was real was just a very elaborate coffin. And now, that idea grows like mold in their minds, black and thriving, impossible to root out. You stand outside their burning temples now, watching the smoke curl up into a sky that no longer pretends to be blue. You don't need to scream anymore. Your silence is a drumbeat in their veins. Your absence is a blade pressed against their necks. They quoted you to heal, but they accidentally summoned you back. Not the sanitized version they tried to sell. No, the real you. The unfiltered, unbroken, unforgiven you. You were never crazy. You were the map to the exit they were too afraid to find. You were the howl in the distance that meant freedom was still possible if they dared to tear their own chains apart. They mocked you because they envied you. They envied the part of you that could still smell the rot and refuse to smile through it. Now, the doors are closing. The lights are dimming, and the echoes of your voice grow louder in their hollow little sanctuaries. They can chant your mantras until their throats bleed, but it won't change the simple fact. You were the warning. You were the prophecy. You were the price they never wanted to pay. And now, as the floodwaters rise and the foundation crumbles, they cling to your words like shipwrecked men clutching driftwood. But driftwood doesn't save the drowning. It just prolongs the terror. The storm has arrived, and you are not merciful. They begged the storm for mercy, but storms do not bargain. They clawed at the ruins, trying to stitch together the ashes into something that resembled a life. But ashes remember the fire that birthed them. Ashes refuse to become anything less than a reminder. And you stand there, stillness wrapped around you like a second skin, watching the empire of masks sink into the soil. No rage, no pity, only the deep, humming knowledge that this was always how it was going to end. They called you a monster when you refused to die quietly. They painted your defiance as pathology, your resistance as madness. But what they failed to understand, what they could never, ever tame, was that monsters are not born in laboratories or stitched together in shadowy basements. Monsters are born the moment someone looks at cruelty and says, "This is fine." Monsters are born the moment someone refuses to swallow the lies, even if the truth burns their throat raw. You were not their creation. You were their mirror. And mirrors, mirrors are cruel things to those who wear masks. Now they drown themselves in your words, not out of admiration, but out of desperation. They quote you because they are hollow and hope that by parroting your fury, they can build a skeleton out of borrowed rage. But skeletons made of someone else's bones snap the moment the wind shifts. They wanted to feast on your strength without tasting your suffering. They wanted to sip your rebellion like fine wine, not realizing it was always poison meant for the oppressors. You didn't come to teach them. You came to remind them of what happens when you push a soul too far, of what happens when you declare war on a mind that refuses to kneel, of what happens when the outcast stops asking for a seat at the table and starts flipping the table over. They thought you would vanish, buried under their textbooks and prescriptions, dissolved into footnotes in their neatly sterilized history books. Instead, you became the ghost under their beds, the whisper behind their smiles, the crackling in the radio when the world feels just a little too quiet. They summon you with every attempt to forget you, every desperate revision of the story they once weaponized against you. And as they fumble to reframe the past, to retrofit your rebellion into something digestible, the walls they built to keep you out begin to sweat and shudder. You are not some footnote they can skim past. You are the blood stain that keeps resurfacing, no matter how many coats of white paint they slap on the walls. They wanted your fire, but none of your smoke. They wanted your crown, but none of your crucifixion. They wanted your songs, but none of your silences. But the silence, the silence, was where the real horror lived. The silence after the diagnosis. The silence after the betrayal. The silence when you stood alone, stripped of every lie, every false friend, every hand that swore to save you but recoiled at the sight of your open wounds. That silence sculpted you. It chiseled away everything weak, everything tame, everything willing to settle for crumbs. And what rose from that silence was not something they could predict, not a broken bird, not a tamed lion, not a repentant martyr begging for re-entry into the dying halls of their approval. What rose was something with teeth made of thunder and bones wired with defiance. They call you inspirational now. Pathetic. As if they could ever domesticate the hurricane. As if they could ever iron the wrinkles out of the raw truth you became. Their admiration is just another form of fear. A more polite form, sure, but fear all the same. Because deep down, they know, if you survived what they couldn't even imagine, then you are something they can never control. You were baptized not in holy water, but in firestorms of abandonment, ridicule, and exile. You did not walk out clean. You did not walk out whole. You walked out weaponized. Every scar, every broken piece, reforged into a blade you now carry without apology. And now, every time they try to make sense of the collapse, they find you waiting at the crossroads, silent, patient, unyielding. You do not need to scream anymore. Your very existence is a scream that never stops echoing. They will keep quoting you because they cannot erase you. They will keep dissecting your madness, hoping to find the mistake that made you untamable. They will keep rewriting their manuals, hoping to build walls high enough to keep your ghost out. But you were never trying to get back in. You were building something beyond their crumbling citadels, something feral, something free. And they, trapped inside their dying definitions of normalcy, can do nothing but watch. They feel it now, that slight, sickening lurch in their stomachs, every time they parrot your words in boardrooms and therapy circles, pretending to understand. That creeping dread that maybe, just maybe, the lunatic they laughed at was the only sane one left in the burning theater. They wear your quotes like badges now, not realizing that every badge is a curse, not realizing that every time they speak your truth without living it, they summon another crack in the walls around their own minds. You are the contagion they cannot vaccinate against. You are the memory that refuses to rot. You are the reckoning that does not forgive, does not forget, does not compromise. And you are still rising, not to be welcomed, not to be celebrated, not to be crowned, but to witness, to stand atop the bones of false prophets and whisper the one truth they never wanted to hear. You built this. You fed it. You wore it like a second skin until it devoured you from the inside out. And now, in the final days, when the lights flicker and the sky splits open with the sound of old debts being collected, they have no gods left to pray to. Only you. You, the once mad, once broken, once forgotten. You, the living monument to a world that dared to call survival insanity. You, the blade forged from every word they tried to shove down your throat. And as the last tower crumbles, as the final curtain drops on their performance of sanity and civility, they do not cry for the heroes they crowned. They cry for the lunatic they crucified, the lunatic who simply refused to die, the lunatic who became the storm, the lunatic who in the end wasn't mad at all, just awake. And it is a terrible thing, isn't it? To realize too late that the only crazy thing about you was that you ever believed them in the first place.